Hey guys, this is Bunny Muffins. I've been Challenger quite a few times before, and I'm going to give you 9 tips that I've never actually heard people talk about before. If you're a pretty high rank, but you're not quite at the highest rank that you want to be, such as if you're trying to climb to Grandmaster or Challenger, I have 9 tips for you that you guys can implement today into your game. And while these are still important at all levels of the game, these are a lot of common mistakes that I see a lot of Masters players making, and a lot of Diamonds and below as well, of course. So just as a preview, I have 2 theory crafting tips, 4 in-game playstyle tips, and the last 3 tips are all about getting better at TFT outside of the game. And I actually think those are super underrated for a lot of different players, so I do recommend watching till the end to hear about those as well. So without revealing the first tip quite yet, let's play a quick game of Would You Rather. So when you guys are building one of your tank units against magic damage, which one would you rather have? Would you rather have 3 Dragon's Claws or 1 Warmogs and 2 Dragon's Claw? The math says the second option is much better. So essentially, each point of resistance adds what's called effective HP. So let's just assume you are at 1,000 health. If you multiply this number by 7.5, which is 750 magic resistance, you get essentially 7,500 effective HP. And I know there are base resistances and base health differences, but let's just ignore those differences for now. I just want to show you guys the math for someone with 1,000 health. If we compare this number to the person with Warmogs, which gives an additional 1,000 health, and then the 500 magic resistance from Dragon's Claw, we see that this person actually gets 10,000 effective HP. So obviously having a Warmogs and 2 Dragon Claws are better against pure magic damage, and since you have the Warmogs, this is even better against all the physical damage as well. So clearly one of these builds is much better than the other. If we take a look at a second example, this one is dealing with damage, and this one makes the comparison much more obvious. Have you guys ever seen anyone build like 3 Death Blades on an AD carry? I haven't personally, and this isn't just because there are only so many swords in the game. If you compare 3 Death Blades versus a Last Whisper, Infinity Edge, and Shadow Zeeks, for example, where you have 1 armor reduction item, 1 crit item, and 1 attack speed item, this second build gives a full dimension of stats rather than just focusing solely on one of them. So tip number 1 is all about building a variety of stats instead of focusing on just one. So why do you want to spread out the love? So first of all, if you only stack one stat, all the numbers and benefits that you get are all additives. For example, with Dragon's Claw, you only get more magic resistance. However, for tankiness, there's more than just magic resistance at play. There's health, there's damage reduction modifiers, and then of course there are your resistances. For damage, there are critical strikes, there are damage buffs, there are raw stats such as attack damage, and then there's also attack speed. So if we take a look at the build of the Last Whisper, Infinity Edge, and Shadow Zeeks, when you combine 3 different stats all in one, you actually get multiplication to damage instead of just sole addition if you are only stacking one stat. So again, this applies to both tank and damage items, and this is one of those item mistakes that I see people making a lot. They often on late game carousels, if they need a 3rd item for their carry, they often just expand on one stat instead of branching out to different ones. So now we are going to go to tip number 2, and this is to build a balanced team. So this is building off the first tip. If you want to win in TFT, you need to find a balance in your overall composition. So generally, you need a mix of tankiness, damage, and utility. So pretty much every strong composition in the entirety of TFT has this. If you guys found an example from like set 1 or 2 that do not follow this, do let me know down in the comments, but I am 99% sure no comp in the history of TFT doesn't have one of these traits. So we can achieve these 3 metrics, damage, tankiness, and utility, through 3 different methods in the game right now. So right now we have units as one of them, traits as another, and the last one is our items. So in TFT, some synergies give 2 different metrics that we talked about before. Some only give 1, some give all 3. But in general, every single composition has a strong mix of all of these. For example, if you get all your damage from your traits, all your tankiness through your items, and all your utility through your units, you're still covering all 3 grounds even though you're getting them from different sources. We can take a look back at an old composition such as Spirit Sharpshooters, where the composition did not run a single tank unit, but it built a lot of tank items instead to make up for it. For a more sort of standard composition, in set 5 we can see that the Vel'Koz composition has a main damage dealer in Vel'Koz with 3 damage items, and then a main tank in Garen with 3 tank items. The rest of the team, they all provide some sort of utility. Lux gives a shield, Rel gives a shield and a stun, Ivern, Zyra, and Nautilus all stun, and then Karma gives the Invoker trait, which gives more mana to the entire team. This composition also has defined tank traits such as Ironclad and defined damage traits such as Spellweaver, but this doesn't always have to be the case. We can check out 6 skirmishers, which is also really popular in set 5, where skirmishers give both attack damage and a shield, effectively giving 2 metrics in one trait. If we look at a lot of the other melee-only compositions in the past, for example, berserkers, Locket was a very popular item on them because they all needed a shield because they were all in the front line. But since skirmishers already gain an innate shield, no one is building Locket on these guys unless they are absolutely forced to. This means in the 6 skirmisher comp, you only need to provide utility with the rest of your units and items, and we can see this is being done through the use of Sunfire Cape and Morellonomicon on Pantheon and Kennen. Redemption is a very highly played item on Pantheon, and lastly on Jax we prioritize Bloodthirster and Quicksilver and not pure damage. Now let's move on to tip number 3. And this is stop following leveling and economy guides. So if you guys are subscribers to the channel, you guys already know that I release a leveling guide pretty much every set. So why am I telling you guys not to follow this? Well, if you guys listen in the beginning, this video is for the advanced players who are really trying to push ranks like Grandmaster and Challenger. So a ton of players can get to Masters, even Grandmasters, by simply following a leveling template and doing the same exact thing every game. However, a template is just that, it's just a template. It's not the best way to play every game, and when you are trying to fight for like the top 0.1 percentile, one factor that separates a Challenger player from a Grandmaster or Master player is that they know when to break these leveling and rolling templates. Challengers know when to roll on level 6, how much to roll on level 7 to actually stabilize, and they also know how to decide whether to do a fast 8 or a slow 8. Again, are all leveling guides bullshit? No, they're not. They're simply just not for advanced players. They're great for people who are just getting started, and again, like, you could literally blindly follow a leveling guide and get to Masters pretty easily, and even get to Grandmasters if you have all your other fundamentals covered. But if you really want to push for the very top slots, you really have to do a little more than that. And life sure does get easier once you know when to bend the rules a little bit. So building off of that, tip number 4 is you need to get better at all aspects of TFT. So you often hear me say like, oh, you could get to this rank by doing this, this, and that. For example, I say all the time, you can force one comp all the way to top 10 Challenger. You could do other things such as never scout. You could do things such as like only following a leveling template and doing the same exact thing every game and get to Challenger, no problem. Like, this is true. You can do that, but I don't recommend it. The reason why other players are able to get to top 10 by only playing one composition is because they really, really do know that composition inside and out, and they have every other aspect of the game mastered. If you do not have your fundamentals covered as strong as those players, you're simply not going to be able to get to top 10 if you only play one composition. Essentially what I'm trying to say is those players are so good at the game that even gimping themselves by limiting themselves to one composition, it doesn't actually affect their overall playing power. So perfecting all aspects of TFT except one is very difficult, so I actually recommend getting very, very good at pretty much multiple dimensions of TFT rather than just trying to be the very best in 90% of them. Again, a lot of people in the top 10, some of them are just very, very good at everything, but other people, they are extreme experts in just one or two things, and you need to find a balance of what works for you. But in general, all these players' fundamentals are all really, really high, so you really have to get to that level first before trying to do these weird strategies such as forcing only one comp or doing stuff such as never scouting. So deviating a little bit from compositions, I want to talk more about your playstyle for tip number 5. So as I said before, some players only play one comp, some have like an AP comp and an AD comp, and others only play AD comps, for example. And of course, there are the people who flex everything all the way to the top. But if you are wondering which one is best, if a computer is playing, obviously flexing is going to be the very best way to play the game. However, we are not computers. So TFT is an auto chess game, and just like in regular chess, computers are stronger than humans in complicated tactical positions in regular chess. However, just because a certain position is good when played perfectly doesn't mean you should try to achieve that if you're just playing over the board as a human. And the same concept applies to TFT. So unless you are trying to become the world champion, do not purely play flex unless you're doing it for fun. If you want to climb, stick to one playstyle, and you can still win the world championship without playing flex, just FYI. But in North America, out of the top 25 players, maybe around 10% of them play flexibly. In Europe, it's maybe 30 to 40%. Playstyles tend to be region dependent, but if you look at the top 10 ladder players, I often find that they are almost always playing 10 different playstyles as they are all playing their own game and they're not really copying each other that much. So I actually think this is a great thing for TFT because it means the game is far from solved and you can kind of do your own thing to climb even higher. Next, I want to talk about playing like aggressively or greedy. And theoretically, there is no such thing as an aggressive or a greedy play. There's simply just correct and incorrect. Again, if we're talking about a computer, they will be able to know which play is actually correct and incorrect. It all depends on the situation. However, the correct play is almost never found because, again, we are humans, so we need to throw out the idea of playing perfectly. So my suggestion to you guys is look at someone's playstyle that you like, copy them, or develop your own. Either works. Maybe you could do a mix of the two. Just keep in mind that between certain patches, you may find that one playstyle is superior to another just based on that current meta. For tip number 6, I want to clear up a common misconception, and that is don't be afraid to contest compositions. While this statement is valid in many scenarios, it is not the rule. I've often seen a lot of people say like, oh man, my comp is so contested, like should I go for it or should I pivot? So for example, let's say you are in a game and there are 3 Jax players. However, in this particular scenario, you naturaled a Jax on level 6 and you are low health. In this situation, you simply cannot afford to pivot out of it, and you already have a decent start for that Jax composition. So in situations where you just can't afford to switch, you definitely cannot pivot. Alternatively, sometimes you are just completely high rolling a composition. I've seen like 2-star 4 costs on level 6 without rolling. And in those games, it's not up to you to pivot, it's up to the other players to pivot. So even if you have 1 stars of everything else, if you have like the primary carry or like a lot of 2 stars of the 3 cost units, it's pretty much not up to you to pivot. It's up to the other 3 players who are trying to go for your same composition, because you are going to be strong throughout the mid game. So you will eventually kill off the people who did not get lucky in the roll downs. And while you might not get first place because you are pretty contested, simply just punishing the other players will almost guarantee you a good placement in the lobby. Times where you should pivot contested comps is if you find a different carry, or if you continue to not get a good mid game after a great early game start for a certain composition. For example, in poker, you could sometimes start out with pocket aces, but then you might eventually fold once the flop comes out because other players might have stronger hands than you. Just because you get a good start for something doesn't mean you are guaranteed to win the game. So now that we have the first 6 tips out of the way, let's get into the 3 tips that will really improve your play outside of playing the game. So the first tip I have for you guys is stop spamming games, and it's more complicated than that. So since you guys are looking for advanced tips, I'm guessing you guys play a lot. This is suboptimal. The best way to get better at TFT isn't by playing 16 hours a day. You may see a lot of streamers do that, like they play like 8 hours a day on stream, maybe like 5 hours off stream, but you do have to remember that it is their job to play, so they are the exception to the rule. So the scenario I want to set up is, what if you were preparing for a TFT tournament, like a serious one? So far, these are non-existent in TFT apart from Worlds, but really because of the way the qualifiers are set up, you kind of just have to get lucky on one day. But let's assume they have like a very good tournament format with a good sample size and a good prize pool. I guarantee you that every pro player, even if they are a streamer, would not be spamming games 16 hours a day to get better at the game. So with that in mind, like, what is the best way to prepare for a tournament or to get better at TFT? So I know a lot of you guys have jobs or like school or something like that. So however, let's assume that you really are trying to grind up and get better at TFT. What would I suggest? So in the 16 waking hours that we have, assuming we get 8 hours of sleep, I'd probably have a mix of playing, VOD reviewing other players, VOD reviews of yourself, and discussions with other players. And of course, you also have to mix a few breaks in between. So how would I divide up this time personally? Well, this again is a personal preference, so everything works differently for everyone else, but maybe a mix of playing 4 hours a day, 6 hours of watching other people, and 2 hours of reviewing your own games, and then 1 hour discussing the game with other people. This would leave you with 3 hours to do other things such as eating and exercising for your 16 hours in that day. Again, you can mix and match this however you want. This is just one way to do it. So again, we are going to be continuing off of the last tip for tip number 8, and this is to watch VODs and not stream. So what is a VOD? VODs are essentially videos on demand. It just means that you can watch a game that already happened instead of watching a live stream. So streaming is great and fun, but it's just not the best way to learn. So the best way to learn, again, is by watching VODs. And the reason is because you can pause and fast forward however you want, which will save you a lot of time in the long run. So one technique I found helpful is to pause each video at the start of every round. During this time, I want you guys to think and decide how the player should play that game. So things to do are, what should I buy in my shop? How should I spend my gold? Whether it should be for leveling or rolling? or both? And then after that, which units should I put on my board? And then how should I position my units? After asking those questions, you could decide and see how other players actually play. And then after that, you could either just copy them and play as strong as they do, or improve on that and get even better. If you are extra ambitious, you could even pause after every shop reroll to decide what to buy and what to sell. So after doing this several times, again, you could play like a high level player almost like immediately. Maybe after watching like 3 VODs, you could play almost the same as them in those specific scenarios. But after doing this at the start of each turn, you could just fast forward through the fights to save a lot of time, or watch on 2x speed if you want to hear their commentary. And then with these two techniques combined, you can either sit down and think carefully on a turn, or you can watch twice the amount of footage within the same time frame of watching a stream. So again, videos on demand, much more effective to learn the game than just watching a stream. This brings us on to our last tip, which is try to focus on studying only 1 to 2 players at a time. So this builds off of the last tip, and I think it was tip number 5, which was master only 1 playstyle at a time. So again, TFT has many different playstyles, so it's going to be impossible to master them all. So if you try to combine a lot of things together, have you guys ever heard of the phrase like there are too many cooks in the kitchen? That could end up happening in your TFT game. If you're trying to copy this dude's aggressive leveling strategy with this other guy's greedy, fast aiding leveling pattern, like you're just not going to have a good time. So if you look at the top 10 players of each region, again, they all play pretty differently. Like some of them are a little similar, but most of them, they all are playing their own game, and yet they are all highly ranked. And this is, again, because TFT is very far from being solved. So with this in mind, you really should only focus on studying 1 player or 2 players maximum. And if you do more than that, like you'll subconsciously try to combine and mix too many playstyles when you actually play, and you won't actually learn anything or absorb anything in your game. So again, there can't be 2 captains on a ship, and that same principle applies to Teamfight Tactics. So I will be releasing a common beginner mistake video in the next week or so. So if that is of interest to you, go ahead and subscribe if you have not already. If you are returning, thanks so much for watching me again, and hopefully I will see you again in the future. So those were my 9 advanced tips for you guys to help you climb. Let me know down in the comments which one was your favorite and which one you did not like the most. But if you did learn something today, hopefully you guys are hitting the like button down below to help me out. And apart from that, I will see you guys later.